I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. Today is a major milestone, episode 600. While this show has evolved over the years, my journey behind the microphone actually started all the way back in 2013. Since then, the conversation has grown from simple marketing tactics into deeper pillars of leadership, communication, and storytelling. To celebrate 600 episodes, I'm flipping the script. I've invited my longtime friend and fellow 2013 podcasting pioneer, Mike Gerholdt, to take over the host's chair. We're going behind the scenes on what we've learned over the past 600 or so episodes, from the origin story of the podcast to flirtations with terrestrial radio to the move to full video. We're going to take a look at what it takes to build a podcast brand that lasts. Mike's interview with me is coming right up. But first, Mike Gerholdt, welcome to On Brand.
Hi. I feel like I don't have your chair. I have my own chair. You said I was taking over the chair. So.
I did not send the chair.
The chair
over.
Doesn't fit me.
So before I formally flip it around, I should say that you are Senior Director of Salesforce Admin Evangelism at Salesforce. You lead a group of world-class admin evangelists who are helping Salesforce admins realize their dreams by being technology leaders and advancing their careers, and host of the Salesforce Admins podcast.
Yes.
So
not to have all of that copy scrutinized by your marketing audience and revised because,
well,
what does an evangelist do? Let me tell you.
Well,
connect the dots. Actually, every marketing team should have an evangelist.
You are making it so hard for me to be the guest and you be the host, because I want to say, why should everyone have an evangelist? I'm going to get one question in, and then we'll.
I mean, that's what two podcasters do. We're like two hammers.
Yeah, exactly. Which that
Jimmy Kimmel on the Jimmy Fallon show.
That just sounds painful.
Could be.
But why does everybody need an evangelist? Because I feel like that's a thing that we hear about. We know what it means. We see high-profile examples like Guy Kawasaki, Mike Gerholdt.
Oh, sure.
And
wow,
what I
hear that name mentioned in the same breath. Meanwhile, everybody's Googling my name because they all know Guy Kawasaki.
But why should everybody have a brand evangelist?
A brand evangelist is a good way of putting it. I think too often we've gone through, and we'll talk about like the evolution of social and where things have come. I mean, the last decade and a half feels like we've gone through a century's worth of change. But we've also gone from, if you look at like what traditional media did in the television era, it just blast at people. And then social did kind of the same way, except now you could like follow Tide on Facebook. But they still just talked at you. And the reason I say every brand needs an evangelist is evangelists talk with their customers. They understand the customer standpoint and they bring that internally, but they also understand the brand, the position, where the company's at and where it's trying to go. And they can communicate that with the customer. And so it's kind of a two-way conversation. I always look at it like most companies have, tech evangelism. That's where evangelism lives for the most part. And it's because there's that leap of, we can't just market to them. We also have to show them the tech. I think it's that way with everything. Why aren't you sitting down and having these conversations with your customers about your product as opposed to just selling at them? And that's what evangelists do. We sit down, we understand the customer standpoint, we bring that back to the product managers and say, here's how we can make this better. And then conversely, we also show the customer kind of the product side without selling to them.
There it is. Go
empathetic.
Get it.
That's what we do. We bring a little empathy to marketing.
Go get yourself an evangelist, listeners. Right. Well, speaking of fostering conversations, I'm going to flip it back around, and you can be the host to talk about, this podcast, but I also was really excited because you and I kind of started this podcasting journey at the same time, and would share stories. So you seemed like, as I looked back and kind of wanted to reflect a little bit, you seemed like the perfect one to be a part of that conversation. And I wonder, in handing you the reins of this interview, if if you would take us back, set the scene. How did we get here?
Oh man, do we get the like Wayne and Garth? Diddle-a-doo, diddle-a-doo, diddle-a-doo.
Oh
Okay,
man, I am not. We're
not sound effect. You're not Jim Kramer. That's
I,
fine.
you know
I'm okay with that.
I do I don't have all of them, but there is a
Oh,
little hi hat in
hey,
there.
hey!
So
Whenever I hit a zinger. So you mentioned 2013, and I feel like, I mean, you and I did a lot of research. I did a lot of research in 2012. I think there was probably a few generations of podcasting. The reason we come back to like 2012, 2013 is I believe that's when iPhones could really get a new episode without having to sync to a Mac.
mm,
And that to me feels like the line where podcasting went from a niche thing to, we kind of understand this because it's almost like a streaming service. If you think back to like Netflix was still sending DVDs, but you could also kind of download or watch some stuff. And that was about 2012, 2013. And so the previous version of that was very much encapsulated. You got, your episodes as soon as you synced them. And so you could probably download 2 or 3 at a time. Now, 2013, we're getting them real time. So Nick publishes on Tuesday. Tuesday, within 5 minutes of you publishing, my phone is updated and I have that. And I feel like to me, that was podcasting kind of growing up and getting out of the parents' basement and becoming a first class citizen. So
yeah. Well,
yeah,
and
so that to me was the impetus for why I started, and I think why you started, right?
yeah, and I think that also around that time, I remember we were probably, in considering the type of content that we were creating, I think we probably both thought of ourselves as bloggers
Hmm.
primarily. You weren't even, you were blogging about Salesforce
Yes.
from your position in another company at that time. I was blogging about marketing for my consulting business, and then, like you said, this kind of intersection of trends and tech came together, and everybody thinks that like that was the start of podcasting, I think, but it really goes back, I think even like 6 or so years before that. But that did kind of kick it up a notch. And I remember us both kind of thinking, well, I guess we're going to have to go experiment with what this is now. And you, being very smart, uh, went with something that was related to your business and what you did. And I thought, well, there's so many other marketing podcasts out there.
There's a million marketing podcasts out there.
There still are, but I thought, I'll along with my podcast co-host at the time, DJ Waldo, we thought we're just going to talk about people, um, and their work habits at this crazy time.
Hmm.
And that was the Work Talk Show, and it was a lot of fun as a podcast. And I managed to dig it back up and get it put back into the various systems out there. Some weeds had grown on it. Um, but after a couple of years, it was obviously such a growing medium, but it was one that didn't really have, my show didn't have anything to do with the rest of my professional life. Ideally, you want to
I
be
don't think you
doing.
give yourself enough credit.
Okay, go on.
I'm gonna jump in there
Give
because
me some more credit.
I'll give you some credit. Well, so 2012, 2013, on top of just iPhones getting stuff downloaded through the waves, that also became, and I remember thinking you were a pioneer of this, working from home.
Ah, yeah.
So you started working from home 2007,
Yes.
which to me was like, wow, I have no idea how you do that. And now, fast forward, I've been working from home for 12, 13 years. But 2012 to me also felt like that was the time when things in our medium, in marketing, could start to be done at home. People were taken legitimately working from home. And you and DJ understood that because you did stuff from home. So that's where the Work Talk Show came from. I actually think, you should bring it back, because if you look at where work has gone, it kind of evolved, and I felt at a pretty good place pre-pandemic.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then the pandemic happened, and we suddenly realized a lot of people could work from home. Now it's almost the reverse. And we're seeing backlash about that. And we're seeing people be very opinionated about having to return to an office. I actually think a Work Talk Show would do well. So
Well,
there's my pitch to,
for God's sakes, don't tell
even
DJ.
though I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
He's texting me, every couple of months. Hey, if you want to, and but you do raise a good point, and that's why I did want to get those redistributed, and we'll toss a link to that into this show, but back onto Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, because there are some good conversations with. We were just talking about Daniel Coyle, author of The Talent Code, The Culture Code, and I think his new book is Flourish. And he's going to be a guest coming up here, but he was a guest on the Work Talk Show. And here's an author doing a very interesting type of work remotely, and he lives in Alaska. I think part of his writing practice was writing it all out longhand, which seems
handwritten. Yeah, I remember that.
Seems painful or hand cramp inducing, but I do think, especially like you said with the pandemic, that was kind of I inadvertently created the podcast that I needed to figure out how to work from home effectively, and it helped me. So,
well, but you did it, and you can expand on this because you've been a podcaster. Why? Well, there's a lot of market saturation in the marketing podcast area. So as a marketer, how do I stand out? What do I do in podcasting? What's the number one and number two rule? Niche, 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 like keep going down. And I think that's one thing that you did early on. That's why you're at 600 episodes, is you don't necessarily have to go with the stream. It's maybe you go against the stream, you find a way to co-brand yourself, and then you stand out. It's not standing out in terms of 100 streetlights. It's really being the one streetlight that's not turned on, and people going, hey, why is that way? And I think you did that with the Work Talk Show.
Well, I think, it kind of makes me think of the advice on writing books that might be applicable to podcasting, because people often say, that you should write the book that you needed but didn't have. And I think that's good advice for shows. And what I really wanted to do was to have, because I had a co-host before, and we had a guest, and we tried to keep the conversation relatively short. And of course, now this was, before the 3-hour Joe Rogan stuff. But I wanted, it's going to make me sound selfish, but I wanted to talk a little bit more with the guest, and for a little longer, and to go a little deeper. So I'd say with On Brand, that's kind of what I did. And then on the book front, that became, for both books, but Brand Now especially, one where those conversations for the podcast became research for the book as well.
Right. So you bring up an interesting topic, which is kind of the history of books, and blogging is equivalent to that, and writing things out long form. We've also experienced that, and you can talk us through, like, early days podcasting. We basically were like, Wolfgang Mike from the 1970s. Hey, everybody, welcome to the, and like, it was jazzed up. It was as close to what we were hearing growing up as kids on AM FM radio,
Yeah.
except it wasn't, because it was, you could play and pause it. So we call those, I mean, I guess we call radio old school nowadays,
Yeah.
right? The traditional medium. But, that's what podcasting was in the early days. I mean, what do you miss from doing shows like that, and what do you wish would come back?
From doing shows like the early days of
Like the early days of
podcasting?
radio. I mean, there were, I remember going to a studio and having a professional voice actor,
Oh, yeah.
welcome to the button click, like, is,
Same. Well,
Roddy as possible.
and I'm trying to remember how long I went before, because I had a VO, a read-in from, that was a professional voiceover. And then I realized at a certain point, it should be my voice, because I think that's one of the things that, and I have not thought this analogy through enough yet, so it's coming out a little unfinished, but I think you think about broadcast radio as a medium was kind of the big booming DJ and the heavy production. And I think what you hear about podcasting and the strength of the medium and people's relationship to it is that it is your voice in, I mean, we're listening to it in the car and everywhere else, but
Right.
by and large, and the origin of that is your voice right there in their ears.
Mhm.
So it is, I mean, I think we kind of say, oh, it's a conversation and toss it off a bit, but it really is. And I think I think that was kind of the growing pain between, oh, this is internet radio and we're doing internet radio shows versus these are conversations that are with a community. I don't know. See, this is where
you're building your community. So raw thoughts, right? Like, here's the Nick Firehose just coming. But it all comes to an evolution, right? Like, so we started with why podcasting, or that was the thesis. And it was because the black and white text on the page didn't convey the emotion, period. I mean, you talk a lot, and we'll talk a lot about storytelling. I storytell. Like, what do evangelists do really well? We storytell. What do marketers do really well? They storytell. You can storytell really well in black and white text, but man, there is something about hearing somebody talk about, landing their first job and being enabled in tech and rolling out something and getting a pat on the back and hearing the words come out of their mouth as opposed to reading it. And so I think that was the natural evolution of content for you and for myself. And then as we got into podcasting, we also realized, well, this radio format that we know doesn't work.
Yeah.
We also have to evolve it. And I think that's where the intro that you mentioned came from. And it's where other, cold intros and long form, like the Rogan, the 3-hour podcast. I had a guest on the other day from Australia, and he said, the only reason I listen to your podcast is it's 30 minutes from my front door to the fishing dock. Great. Works for me.
It makes me think of, we mentioned Guy Kawasaki on earlier, and I had him on again recently, and he thanked me for the length of the interview. He said, oh, thank goodness. It's, because I do think, so I think that's the end of the trend that we're at now, are these kind of I can talk for as long, and you've got people in comfortable chairs doing this.
I don't understand that. I have to sit so I don't get weird sunlight dots, right?
Yeah. But I do think there's something, because that is a medium, and look, I mean, those are what some of the biggest shows are. They're the people in the chairs with the
right.
boom arm, and they're in a comfy chair because they're going to be there for hours. But it is a little bit different than like your doc guy, I think. And and I wonder if it's like a work focused B2B professional podcast versus a lifestyle podcast.
I think so. I don't think it's necessarily the type or the content of the podcast. I think it's where people are today in 2026. And I think today in 2026, because I want to talk about, kind of how you've widened your lens of this podcast too. I think we're at a point now, again, right? Like we always talk about inflection points. I'm not going to say disrupt because that's a barfy term. We're not disrupting podcasting. Like, how do you do that? I don't know. You listen to it on not an iPod. Well, no one has an iPod. We all have iPhones. But where we're at now is we used to, we have to be short because it's got to be TikTok length. Everybody's attention spans are short.
That's on the other side of it.
Right. Okay. So great. So then we do that. And to the point of what Guy was reacting to when you did the long form interview, you didn't want just the 3 or 4 snippets. You actually wanted to dig in. And so now I think we're seeing that where we're not catering to shorter and shorter. I mean, the race to zero is what, a 1 second podcast?
Say a word.
Right. It's like name your
word.
Tune.
Yeah.
But it's also how do we get, what is your community? Because every podcast has a community. If you subscribe to a podcast, you're part of that podcast community. The level of your involvement depends on you. But you have a community here and you widen it to bring in more perspective very intentionally because people's tastes change, right? Like you can go broader and longer because if the community gives you that permission, then you absolutely should. It's not like, well, I have to be 5 minutes because that's the TikTok length or that's the YouTube length. I was on a call today with somebody from Georgia and she said, I listen to 3 or 4 podcasts a day because I can put them on in the background. I can do my work and I can still consume. Well, great. Then that doesn't mean that you're constricted to a 30-minute podcast because you're commuting or a 15-minute podcast because that's the length of a dog walk. Like these are all things that podcast surveys tell podcasters we should be doing. But then the reality is, well, how do people actually consume it? So, yeah. So that's a long story answer of I don't think 3 hours is wrong. I don't think 5 minutes is wrong. I think what's wrong is when your audience tells you, I want 35 minutes and you're giving them 3 hours.
That is a very, very good point. It reminded me when you were talking about expanding the voices in the community. And, one of the reasons too, why I wanted to have this chat with you is, we would frequently get together and troubleshoot and talk about this over 2 or 3 or 10 beers and
sodas.
And just lots of good advice. And I remember one thing you started getting me thinking about as we were kind of changing openings of the show and talking about that was, I believe I'm remembering this correctly, and that is that you talked about like the time to getting to the guest voice and trying to close that up, that there's so much, I mean, even with the produced intro with the other voice, and then it comes to Mike for another intro, and then so many different things, and the guest talking would be so far away, and I feel like that's a gap that you've taught me to close.
Well, if you think about it, part of that was just selfish for me. If I found a podcast, I would listen to an episode like while I was mowing the lawn. And if they weren't getting me somewhere, then I'm not going to I'm going to invest in maybe another episode or I'm going to skip to another episode. And then if they don't get me somewhere, I'm going to move on. And that got me thinking well, your title is the guest, but you spend 45 minutes praising yourself and talking, about all this stuff that's just top of mind for you, then you should have just not included the guest name. And that was why I was like, how quick can I get to the guest? Now, that being said, there are, and there were, specifically, I mentioned Mark Maron. He was phenomenal I would wait an hour before he got through his opening monologue to get to the guest, because he was very insightful. And he also brought a lot to the podcast before he got to the guest. Yeah. Sometimes I would just listen to his intros, but I felt like, you and I aren't Mark Maron. We're not going to sell out a stadium. Like, we're struggling podcasters who don't have that celebrityism that just naturally brings a million downloads. How do I get people to what they asked for? Right. And it's the same when you go to a restaurant. Like, you sit down, you feel the minutes in between the time that you sit down and you get a menu. And then you feel the minutes in between the time you put the order in and the food, right? Like, that's a classic trope in movies. Like, we ordered 45 minutes ago, right? And that I feel like is the same thing when you do a podcast. Like, you promised, like your episode with Guy Kawasaki. Why do I have to wait 45 minutes to get to Guy Kawasaki?
Right.
Like that,
right.
That was the lead in. Get me to what was important. Now, if you have more to add, then absolutely, or do an episode on your own. So,
yeah. It is interesting too. Because it also makes me think, when you try to leave room for the other person, there have been a couple of guests where I've realized over the years, I think I spoke like twice.
Yeah, I've had a few guests where I ask a question like, "So, tell me how you got started," and then it's
10 minutes later.
That was a fun interview. They asked and answered their own questions.
Yeah, well,
I was just here to press record.
That's the podcaster's job.
But I mean, so talk about that, because I think one of the things, and this is stuff that you and I have talked about. The purpose you host a podcast, because in theory I'm hosting this, even though I don't know, it's volleying back and forth at this point. Who has the better question? One of the things that I've talked with you about, that we've talked about, and I actually came from the Mark Maron podcast, was the role of the host, and how it really is akin to like public speaking. You don't just get on and you're Steve Jobs good. You don't just get on and you're Larry King good. And the role is really, as you've mentioned it, how do you say as few a number of words and get the guest speaking so that they look the best? The show isn't you. The show is them. You just have to bring the best out in them. So the opposite of exactly what I'm doing.
So I remember, because I was just talking about coming off of the work talk show, that it's like I wanted to ask my questions, and this gave me the opportunity to do that. But then right as I was getting ready to record my first batch of episodes, I realized, oh no, I'm not an expert in interviewing. So I went down, spent an afternoon reading, what does Katie Couric and Terry Gross and Mark Maron say about interviewing, and I was relieved yet scared, because there wasn't like a secret science. Here's how you do it. It was it was having a conversation, and I think, to make that sound less abstract and fluffy, I also think probably when guests have been kind enough to compliment me afterwards, saying that was a great conversation, I enjoyed it. I always say, and probably what I've said the most, is that I feel like if I pick a guest that I want to talk to, and I remember in like the lean years of looking for guests, of I gotta shake all my friends upside down, and now I think I could, just because being at this for 13 years or whatever, and I think I'm on a list of podcasters. I get so much uh,
Mhm.
so many pitches that
Mhm.
are so bad, and this guy has a get rich quick scheme.
Mhm.
Have
Oh,
him on
perfect. That'll
as
work because my
a diet
podcast.
pill expert.
Oh, perfect. Let's talk about that because clearly you've listened to my podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a ton of that, but I do try to sift through that, and if it's that could be interesting. I would like to know how someone and it gets back to kind of the story concept. If someone's done something interesting, um I think it's kind of remarkable to be able to talk to them, because that's why. And back to the remote work angle of it all, the podcast is, and probably running as long as it has, is because it's a weekly conversation that I get to have with someone that I think is really interesting. On Brand will be right back after this. Now, back to the show.
So where you went right and why you expanded the podcast and kind of we'll probably talk about moving to video is asking questions and being the answer to where I think you were taking us, being genuinely curious about the person that's sitting across from the microphone from you or across the desk, proverbial. Because I think in interviewing people, that's the trait I would say. Everybody thinks it's a skill. Well, I think it's a trait that drives skill. Is the ability to be curious. Like you're genuinely curious about any of the guests that you're interviewing, whether it is marketing or marketing related,
Yeah.
and related to the topic. And I think that's where, since we're sort of nebulous talking about podcasting and starting, is where a lot of people and a lot of hosts go wrong, right? Like we were at the same conference together and they talked about the first 10 podcasts. Like once you hit 10, you're probably going to succeed. Well, you're at what, 60 times that math.
Well, I guess, yeah.
But I mean, you've hit 600 and you don't hit 600 because, oh, it's a job. I've got to get to it. Right. When you sit down, I booked this guest, even the people that were hard to shake. I'm genuinely curious. And so I think, if you were to go back and listen to some of your episodes, or read the transcripts, I bet at some point you say, I'm curious, or I'm curious about because you actually, it's bringing in their perspective because you are broadening the topic and you want to know how they put things together, which is why I think, the power of storytelling. But it all comes back to, I mean, being a good podcast host, you don't get to 600 episodes literally without curiosity. And I think that's why you're here is you're genuinely curious about every single person you talk to.
Well, being a host may make you not a great guest, which is why I'm so elusive with my answers. But all of what you said, I well, thank you for the kind words, and it's certainly what I try to do, and which is also why it's kind of funny, as I get a lot of people booking guests with me on, a lot more intermediaries. Um,
They want to bring somebody else on.
yeah, like from PR
Okay.
services, and
Sure.
and but a lot of times they want send the questions.
Uh-huh.
And in the early days, I mean, not, but for a long time, I would say I would go through this whole kind of mini conversation that we're having, that it's just a conversation, and it's just,
Right.
yes, but still, we'd like to know. And I'm like, okay, you're trying to check your box here. So a long time ago, I created a list of questions that you can go find online at the onbrandpodcast.com/prep link that I send everybody. And I don't know that I've ever had those up and gone 1, 2, 3, 4. But that's like maybe what it might be, and it checks that box for someone else. I have had a couple of guests that have said, "Hey, I don't have answers to some of those." I'm like, "Don't worry, ignore that." But
Right.
I felt like it was something I had to put out there because I think curiosity and conversation are important. I think for some people, it is scary.
I think corporations have learned to mitigate it. I also get the I want to have PR on. I also get a lot of the, not that you asked me this, but you're just going to learn it. I want to bring somebody else on, and I feel like, well, first of all, it's not a game of dodgeball. Like it's me and you talking. If I always say, if you can bring somebody else on and they add to the conversation,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I'm not going to sit here and volley questions back and forth. So, Gene, hey, Tom, hey, Susan, like, you don't get anywhere. And the person listening is just like, man, like,
I don't.
also panels don't work on
That's
podcasts and on events, just don't. But that's why, because, and to your question point, just to tie that on. So I literally just had a meeting the other day where somebody said, I just want to have a meeting, talk about what we're going to talk about. And I'm like, wow, okay.
Oh
Can you
yeah.
send me the questions? And I said, ask me this: before you go have coffee with your friends, do you send them a list of what you're going to talk about? Well, no. Like, they said no.
Yeah.
Like, they really reacted like I just shoved a lemon in their mouth. Well, no. I said, exactly. That's all this is a conversation. And you know all the answers.
Well, and that's what I say to guests when I kind of am talking with them in the few minutes before, because I don't like doing prep calls. I kind of think it's like the late night stuff. You hear about people doing pre-interviews, but I
Yeah.
don't know if it was someone.
You also get all the good stuff in the pre-interview.
Yeah,
And then when they
yeah.
show up, you're like, hey, remember that time yesterday when I asked you this question? Could you repeat the answer? Because now we're recording.
And that's why I say I'll read a very short bio because I'm a lazy podcaster and I don't want to do it later. And you can tell
Yeah.
me if I'm saying your name wrong, which I don't want to do. And
Right.
and then for about 25 minutes, we're going to talk about your work. And then I'm going to close by asking you for a brand that's made you smile. And I feel like those three things the guests themselves get. Because
Right.
saying we're going to talk about your work is something kind of like having coffee with a friend. It's like, what do you do? That's what. And if I've done my biggest job, I think, is picking the person.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but you're the host, so you have to pick the person.
I'm imagining a question, like you said. I'm gonna whatever you said about. I'm gonna imagine that you did this. I'm gonna imagine that this is a question that you asked, like, what weird rules have you created? And you kind of made me think of one. I really don't like being pitched to guests for the very reason that you said. I think it's hard to navigate. I feel like it gets messy. I have to make sure that Nick gets a question, then Mike gets a question. Now Mike answers Mike's question, Nick answers
Right.
Nick's question, and it's like like you said, a game of dodgeball. And so whether it's co-authors or co-founders of a business, I get it pitched, but I usually reply and say, "Take a look at my show. Who do you think's the best fit?"
Right. Now, I do think this is a good jumping off point to talk about video, because this is probably my first video podcast, because I've always made the joke I have a face for radio, talking about, back in the day. You jumped to video way faster than me. I haven't even jumped to video yet, but video is clearly where podcasting is going. Video with two guests is way easier because you have that visual element.
Oh, yeah.
I think for me, being audio only, it's the burden of the host has to be like, okay, so Amber, tell me about this, and then the listener has to equate the sound, whereas visually you don't. You can bounce back and forth. Tell me why you moved to video, and why podcasting, because podcasts did come out. Remember, we had this conversation of, do we do video or do we do audio?
It's an audio medium.
It's an audio I would bang that drum all day. And now, I mean, I'm losing it. You're on video. This is video. Everybody else is video. Why did we 10 years later come back to video?
I'm sure there's some tech trend summary, kind of like you said, with kind of that sweet spot of 2012. But I do think, Well, it's probably, I'll think about this, I'll get there. Like what you were mentioning before, TikTok short form video. Video is everywhere, whether it's 3 hours of something that you're watching on YouTube that's technically a podcast, which is a whole
Right.
other conversation. There's this category of things called podcasts, and it lives so many different places. And you're watching a 3 hour thing there on YouTube. You're watching a short form thing on TikTok or a
Mhm.
reel that is from a podcast. And but the why for me really came. I'm a part of this network called the Marketing Podcast Network, and we had someone that we both know, Tom Webster, on, who is at Sounds Profitable, a leading supplier of data in the podcasting space. And he was on and was just talking us through best practices and trends. And he's always been a good reminder on video. And a few years back, I checked the box that I think we both did it through the Headliner app that,
Mhm.
hey, it automatically sends the
Yep.
waveform and your cover art. But at this Tom meeting, it became very clear that that's not enough, that people want video, and that audio people can, and I think Spotify, with the way they handle it, with being able to toggle back and forth depending on what you want. And the other thing that Tom said that really made it clear for me that this was a way that I needed to go was growth. I mean, part of the reason that Marin grumbled about leaving podcasting is everybody's here.
Yeah.
Everybody. I mean, 2012, 13, nothing compared to everybody's got a show, and everybody is fighting for share of ears and eyes. And the growth is in video. You can kind of get what you can get via Apple and I would say even Spotify, but Spotify's really doubling down on video. So if you want to stand out there, if you open Spotify, most of us are getting served up videos when we're there. You can add clips to your show. So I started with those little clips, but then I realized if I'm doing this, actually, here's a funny story that I don't think I've told. Because over the summer, I was kind of thinking about, I think I could do a full video version of this. And I, like many, probably the most watched, listened to podcast episode this past year was Taylor Swift on New Heights.
Oh, I
And
think everybody in the world watched that.
yeah, and we did. We sat down and watched it, but I remember because I was looking and thinking about this, and they had some cutaways and some stuff that were maybe Kelsey Brothers level production, but by and large, it was a branded frame with a watermark, and I thought, well, shit, I can do that. And that's that's kind of where I move things toward. And the other piece of that is, as a speaker, which is the biggest part of my business outside of teaching, is selling this guy. So if I can better show people this guy, then it serves another purpose.
So I have multiple questions and we're running out of time,
We
but
are.
to narrow it down, from your perspective as a storyteller, what have you changed because you're video now versus audio?
Hmm. Um, well, one thing I don't have to change, because that I just need to figure out, is we talked about time to guest and putting that teaser up front.
Mhm.
I kind of stopped doing that with video, but I might look for a way to. It just means I have to find a chunk of the video and move it back to the beginning.
I think you should do the selling this guy.
So it's the jazz.
Hey,
It's the jazz hands. It's the
it's the
jazz
jazz
hands.
hands. Okay, last question, and then you can get your chair back. 600 episodes. What important skill have you developed that you didn't have when you recorded the first episode?
maybe it's comfort with my own voice, and I mean that two ways. One, I teach public speaking, and I always say to students, if you want to get better, go record yourself, listen to it. And everybody says, "Oh, I hate the sound of my voice."
Uh-huh.
So one is simply the literal, I don't have that same reaction. I just hear myself so much and do so much of this. I joke with the kids because they think I sound like a podcast host walking around the house. So I think that that this guy has taken over whatever the other Nick was. But I also think it's getting comfortable with silence, with stopping, with thinking, with asking questions, and probably leaning into that aforementioned curiosity thing.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, this was fun hosting, Nick.
Well, I'm not going to let you go without asking for a brand mic that's made you smile recently.
I know you were going to ask. I knew you were asking about that. So I had to think about this. It's probably a couple things, but so back to the pandemic, because I feel like, we talked 2012 and then you hit a pandemic. It's partway through. Brand that makes me smile right now because it's delivered every week to my front door is HelloFresh. So we had a lot, I had a lot of meal delivery kits coming during the pandemic, and this isn't a plug for them. Theirs kind of continued to stand out because of the little things that they would include. And I felt like the way that they would send me the appreciation for the feedback I would give. And so it literally kind of feels like it's a little smile in every box. And so I was trying to think of what's a brand that makes me smile? Well, they literally nourish me. They don't do it for free. But the way that they deliver it, I feel it's shown up with care. The choices that I have, the way that they present themselves, and they never feel greedy. They never ask me to up-level my plan. They never ask me for more things. And it just kind of feels like they're like a warm hug, and they're there, but they're not like a used car salesman. So I don't know how long, all the time, right? Hey, do you want to buy some more frittatas?
I was going to say, now watch. Now that's what a lot of people are going to want to buy. They're like, I'm here for this guy.
Right.
Mike, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
So admin.salesforce.com is the main site that I publish all my content to. It's for Salesforce administrators who work on the Salesforce platform and are building their careers in technology. And so that's also, if you search for Salesforce Admins Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right. And I'm going to set you up for a fun one. What about all your cool ass car videos?
I don't have a whole lot, ironically. I publish some stuff on my Instagram, but I feel like I'm trying to, this is probably a whole other podcast of how do you be a brand evangelist and then also have a hobby that is somewhat exclusionary. I mean, to be honest with you, not everybody has a collector car. So, I try not to be too braggadocious about it.
I do not, but I have a million kids, so I can vicariously live through your collector's car.
And sometimes they need their cars worked on or picked up.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, to that end, get yourself a friend, a podcasting friend, a car repair friend like Mike Gerholdt. Thanks for joining us for episode 600. On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.